Good evening. We're back for episode 56 of reading about 10 minutes a day from the Anarchist Handbook, organized by Michael Malice. And tonight we're going to finish up Voltairine de Cleyre from Anarchism and American Traditions from 1909. And we may read the intro to Emma Goldman. We've all been waiting for Emma Goldman. But let's see. Starting on page 216, about halfway down. And anarchism says, make no laws whatever concerning speech, and speech will be free. So soon as you make a declaration on paper that speech shall be free, you will have 100 lawyers proving that, quote, freedom does not mean abuse, nor liberty license. And they will define freedom out of existence. Let the guarantee of free speech be in every man's determination to use it, and we shall have no need of paper declarations. On the other hand, so long as the people do not care to exercise their freedom, those who wish to tyrannize will do so. For tyrants are active and ardent, and will devote themselves in the name of any number of gods, religious and otherwise, to put shackles upon sleeping men. The problem then becomes, is it possible to stir men from their indifference? We have said that the spirit of liberty was nurtured by colonial life, that the elements of colonial life were the desire for sectarian independence and the jealous and watchfulness incident thereto. The isolation of pioneer communities which threw each individual strongly on his own resources, and thus developed all-around men, yet at the same time made very strong such social bonds as did exist. And lastly, the comparative simplicity of small communities. All this has disappeared. As to the sectarianism, it is only by dint of an occasional idiotic persecution that a sect becomes interesting. In the absence of this, outlandish sects play the fool's role, are anything but heroic, and have little to do with either the name or the substance of liberty. The old colonial religious parties have gradually become the, quote, pillars of society. Their animosities have died out. Their offensive peculiarities have been effaced. They are as like one another as beans in a pod. They build churches and sleep in them. As to our communities, they are hopelessly and helplessly interdependent, as we ourselves are, save that continuously diminishing proportion engaged in all-around farming, and even these are slaves to mortgages. For our cities, probably there is not one that is provisioned to last a week, and certainly there is none which would not be bankrupt with despair at the proposition that it produce its own food. In response to this condition and its correlative political tyranny, anarchism affirms the economy of self-sustenance, the disintegration of the great communities, the use of the earth. I am not ready to say that I see clearly that this will take place. But I see clearly that this must take place if ever again men are to be free. I am so well satisfied that the mass of mankind prefer material possessions to liberty, that I have no hope that they will ever, by means of intellectual or moral stirrings merely, throw off the yoke of oppression fastened on them by the present economic system to institute free societies. My only hope is in the blind development of the economic system and political oppression itself. The great characteristic looming factor in this gigantic power is manufacture. The tendency of each nation is to become more and more a manufacturing one, an exporter of fabrics, not an importer. If this tendency follows its own logic, it must eventually circle round to each community producing for itself. What then will become of the surplus product when the manufacturer shall have no foreign market? Why, then mankind must face the dilemma of sitting down and dying in the midst of it, or confiscating the goods. Indeed, we are partially facing this problem even now, and so far we are sitting down and dying. I opine, however, that men will not do it forever, and when once, by an act of general expropriation, they have overcome the reverence and fear of of property, and their awe of government, they may awaken to the consciousness that things are to be used, and therefore men are greater than things. This may rouse the spirit of liberty. If, on the other hand, the tendency of invention to simplify, enabling the advantages of machinery to be combined with smaller aggregations of workers, shall also follow its own logic, the great manufacturing plants will break up. Population will go after the fragments, and there will be seen not indeed the hard, self-sustaining, isolated pioneer communities of early America, but thousands of small communities stretching along the lines of transportation, each producing very largely for its own needs, able to rely upon itself, and therefore able to be independent. For the same rule holds good for societies as for individuals. Those may be free who are able to make their own living. In regard to the breaking up of that vilest creation of tyranny, the standing army and navy, it is clear that so long as men desire to fight, they will have armed force in one form or another. Our fathers thought they had guarded against a standing army by providing for the voluntary militia. In our day, we have lived to see this militia declared part of the regular military force of the United States and subject to the same demands as the regulars. Within another generation, we shall probably see its members in the regular pay of the general government. Since any embodiment of the fighting spirit, any military organization, inevitably follows the same line of centralization. The logic of anarchism is that the least objectionable form of armed force is that which springs up voluntarily, like the Minutemen of Massachusetts, and disbands as soon as the occasion which called it into existence is past. That the really desirable thing is that all men, not Americans only, should be at peace, and that to reach this, all peaceful persons should withdraw their support from the army, and require that all who make war shall do so at their own cost and risk, that neither pay nor pensions are to be provided for those who choose to make man-killing a trade. As to the American tradition of non-meddling, anarchism asks that it be carried down to the individual himself. It demands no jealous barrier of isolation. It knows that such isolation is undesirable and impossible. But it teaches that by all men strictly minding their own business, a fluid society, freely adapting itself to mutual needs, wherein all the world should belong to all men, as much as each has need or desire, will result. And when modern revolution has thus been carried to the heart of the whole world, if it ever shall be, as I hope it will, then may we hope to see a resurrection of that proud spirit of our fathers, which put the simple dignity of man above the gods of Gauds of wealth and class, and held that I'm just going to start that whole sentence over. And when modern revolution has thus been carried to the heart of the whole world, if it ever shall be, as I hope it will, then may we hope to see a resurrection of that proud spirit of our fathers, which put the simple dignity of man above the gods of wealth and class, and held that to be an American was greater than to be a king. In that day there shall be neither kings nor Americans, only men, over the whole earth, men. And that's the conclusion of that on page 219, and I have just enough time to read Michael Malice's introduction to chapter 16, Emma Goldman, from Anarchism and Other Essays, 1910. If anarchism believed in rulers, then Emma Goldman would be the undisputed queen. The tiny woman took on the federal and state governments throughout most of her life, eventually challenging Woodrow Wilson and his Great War, and getting deported for her radical views by a young J. Edgar Hoover. Once in the Soviet Union, she lost very little time telling Lenin to his face what he was doing wrong. At various times, the most hated woman in America and the face of assassination. Red Emma's provocative life and ideas still radicalize people today. And we'll wrap that up, and tomorrow we will start with minorities versus majorities on page 221. So again, about 10 minutes a day reading the Anarchist Handbook, organized by Michael Malice.